Welcome to Making Change, a podcast to understand current events and explore how to make positive changes in ourselves and the world. I am your host, Marc Gopin, Director of CRDC, Professor, and Practitioner of Conflict Healing at George Mason University. Today's episode is Overcoming Tribalism through a New Way of Thinking. Tribalism has many damaging effects on any society in which it occurs. The most important thing to understand about tribalism and gang warfare is that it's deeply damaging to human societies, and that it always has been for tens of thousands of years. We like to think that tribalism is somewhere else. It's not where we exist. We like to think that it is something very far away and very primitive. But the fact is that tribalism is something that we all naturally fall into for a variety of complicated reasons in human nature. We tend to need to affiliate with some groups or some group that will make us feel protected. That originally is the family, of course, and the family unit, but it always expands to be people we trust in larger circumstances, and it becomes very embellished into community, into culture, into our nation. And that is why to study the impact of tribalism and its consequences is a very important part of the sociology and anthropology of the human community. And at the same time, it's very important for us to think about this for the future. So the tribalism that we are talking about, it results in social fragmentation, in violence and insecurity, gang warfare in urban settings or in rural settings can lead to very high levels of violence and insecurity, instability, psychological problems. It shortens lifespans. The economic consequences of this can be quite devastating in terms of disrupting normal business, disrupting the infrastructure of how a society exists. It takes resources towards defense and security and policing and away from other valuable things that human beings can do together. It ultimately leads to a lot of political instability as well, because people take sides and politicians promise on all sides a better life. Some will focus on the victims and some will focus on people who are bystanders. And before you know it, there's this division of society along tribal lines over the subject of who is the real perpetrators, who are the real guilty parties in terms of the causes of the damage that it is causing. This clearly has implications for modern politics, contemporary politics in advanced societies, where they think that they are not tribal, but in fact they do become very tribal along political lines, along the lines of political parties. And this, of late, has overtaken the damaging effects of tribalism along religious lines that used to cause so many deaths and so much warfare that it was eventually overcome by the idea of the liberal state and of people of different religions having equality. And yet we still have not overcome the tendency to revert back into tribes that is expressed through political parties. And political parties have become the new form of tribal and religious warfare. This is something that we need to think about in terms of what are the possibilities of changing this for the better. Now let's explore ways in which this has been achieved in various parts of the world. One of the ways that there has been more understanding between tribal entities is basically communication and relationship building and peace-building initiatives. This has worked throughout thousands of years. All the great cultures of the world record ways in which dialogue, communication, the use of words, they prevent one of the most important forms of conflict and tribalism is the dividing up into tribalism because of misunderstanding, because of not being able to understand other people and their needs, or misinterpreting exactly what they said, and then losing control of one's temper based on what you think somebody said. Well, this is true in family, it's true every day, but it's also true of whole tribes and communities and even cultures and civilizations that can actually end up in massive warfare because of the simple misinterpretation of communication of words. And what that means is that dialogue, very long dialogue, extensive dialogue, until you fully understand whether or not you actually disagree, and if you do disagree, on exactly what. Those are the kind of things that can lead to a greater possibility of peace building, because it simply allows for the prevention of needless violence and conflict based on misunderstanding and miscommunication, and it focuses the whole problem towards actual conflict, actual disagreements, which then lead to the possibility of compromises or of the imaginative possibility of new realities where everyone can achieve their objectives and their needs. There's also been a great deal of work on policing, on better forms of dealing with situations once they're getting out of control in a more rational way. So the more that police are trained, if instead of them being trained for a few months in one country, they are trained for a few years, like in many countries in the world, the opportunity to prevent violence of tribal warfare goes up dramatically, because police who are well trained have an ability to resist those moments of excitement and anger and miscommunication, and be there in the middle and say, hey, wait a minute, what's really going on here? And I've had many conversations with police over the last 5-10 years of seeing exactly their skills when they would walk into an apartment that was filled with conflict, and then they would just say, hey, wait a second, what exactly did you say? And what exactly do you need from this other guy? And just by clarifying, they would diffuse the conflict. That's the same thing as the skills between tribes and gangs and between whole communities. We need people with the skill set of policing our relationships between our tribes, even between our political parties, even between our religions, people who are skilled at that space in between. And that keeps us all safer. That polices our tendency to misunderstand, miscommunicate, and demonize the other side. Another thing that has been done successfully with tribal warfare is judicial reforms. It's the ability to make the justice system, once people have a real serious fight, into something that can work for everybody. Basically, the more that lawyers and judges are honest, the more possibility that people will see themselves resolving their differences through the law and not through taking the law into their own hands. So this is something, again, that is crucial for any stable society, that whatever the tribes are that have been formed, that those tribes can go to court, and that court can be an honest place. This is something we all have to work on. The other thing is cultural and educational programming, where we focus on what it is that binds us together, and that is cultural events, educational materials that emphasize what we share in common as opposed to what splits us apart. And then, in addition to that, we need strong psychological support, because tribal conflict, political conflict, leads to a great deal of triggering and gaslighting and a basic fear of your future. You start to not know who to trust or what to trust because of all the misinformation that comes along with tribal warfare. All of these things are essential in order for there to be a better future. But I want to go back to something even more basic than these methodologies of dealing with tribes, and it comes to our very minds and the way in which our minds work. So I just want to pose a question to everyone to ask yourselves, what kind of questions come up in your mind when you think of the word what, or when you think of the word how, versus the kind of things that come up your mind when you think of the word who? So basically what I'm positing is that a new approach to changing minds is that what questions and how questions are basically positive questions. They're questions about what is to be done. They're very future-oriented. They're thinking about what can we do together? How can we do it in a way that will lead to less conflict between our tribes? But a who question is constantly thinking about who are you versus me? Who are these people? And those kind of questions about identifying the who are usually the who that is distinct from the me and is based on fear. So one of the ways of overcoming tribalism may be a basic self-examination of the way we think when we see problems in front of us, in current events, as we watch the television, as we read the news, as we look at social media. Start to try to ask the questions of what is the problem, how is it to be solved, or what is actually going on and how can I find out, or what is the possibility for the future and how can I get there, as opposed to immediately looking at the social media or the television saying, who did that? Who's responsible for this? Who's missing here? Who's really behind this? All of those who questions are basically about searching for enemies, searching for conspiracy, searching for evil in the world. Whereas the brain's questions in its higher regions of what and how are much more focused on our rational minds and on the future, as opposed to looking for scapegoats, looking for somebody who is evil. If we can focus on, instead of the who of tribalism, on the what of a future civilization that we share, that survives and flourishes, I'm pretty convinced that discipline in every one of us, through our educational systems and through our own reform of ourselves, can start to pull us away from constantly fracturing and fragmenting even more every day in a political situation that is out of control in many countries today, and including in the United States. Social media has made us constantly move towards who questions, towards who is responsible and who is to blame, instead of the basic scientific, rational, and compassionate questions of what's going on, what is to be done, how can we do that, how can we do it together. Each one of us has to take responsibility, first and foremost, for our own minds. And with our own minds and our own way of thinking and our own way of speaking, we set the model for everyone around us. And if we all do this more, I am pretty certain that this is going to change the tribalism that afflicts us now.
Thank you for joining me on Making Change, a podcast to understand current events and explore how to make positive changes in ourselves and the world. I am your host, Marc Gopin. Please check out my recent book, Compassionate Reasoning, Changing the Mind to Change the World, Oxford University Press. Also check out Healing the Heart of Conflict, 8 Crucial Steps to Making Peace with Yourself and Others. Plug those titles into Google with the words Marc Gopin and books. Please see our Facebook page, Making Change with Dr. Marc Gopin, and website, marcgopin.com. Blessings to you today for a healthy mind and body, for safety, and for a flourishing life. For personal consultations and coaching, please contact me at gopinmarc@gmail.com. See you again soon.